additions or changes to the agenda? Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Next is approval of the minutes. Any comments, corrections, or additions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. And Kevin, if you can take it for the next item.
Yes, sir. Be glad to. Planning Board, thank you for being here tonight. And the first item tonight is dealing with short-term rental permitting, a draft ordinance that's made several rounds to council and back to the Planning Board and then to a subcommittee where the subcommittee did some work on trying to make changes to our current ordinance that would be consistent with North Carolina general statutes after a Wilmington case kind of required some jurisdictions to make changes to their ordinances if they had any. And so it did the same for us. I'll give you a little background. I think I've probably given you this before, but for those in the audience and those listening online. North Carolina Court of Appeals case recently decided that the North Carolina general statutes prohibits communities from requiring permits or registrations for short-term rental uses. Involved in this case was the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, which had a permitting requirement to register short-term rentals in the city and also required a lottery for those property owners who wished to rent their property. The lottery process was to limit the number of short-term rentals by a distance requirement. Both of these processes were deemed invalid by the North Carolina Court of Appeals. In response, our town attorney recommends that we cease the registration for short-term rentals and that we remove that language from the land use code. The ordinance that we have will still require some of the provisions about smoke, carbon monoxide detectors, and 911 address postings. This draft ordinance went to council in May, but was tabled for some additional language and study and considerations. And we moved that ordinance to the Planning Board and then on to a subcommittee. The subcommittee recommends that the attached draft ordinance, which requires a zoning permit when there is a change in use to a short-term rental, and eliminates subsection G, which deals with permit revocation. Our land use ordinance still has a section that deals with permit revocation if it's needed. So then the attachments that are provided for you will be a draft ordinance with that proposed and highlighted and added and deleted language. Then there's a clean version so you can see what the ordinance, if approved as drafted, how it would read. And then also included a short-term rental FAQs, a list of questions that would be common for those that want to get on the town's website. All right, what can you answer this question, and maybe a button that you just automatically go to, and then the map that shows the areas that short-term rentals are potentially possible, where they could be, short-term rentals could occur. We'll do Bill passed the map to me and showed a few areas, and I noticed at that time that we've got some places in Chatola that are not included that need to be, and we can make that adjustment. But the short-term rental FAQs gave it to you hopefully with enough time. If you've got any other questions that you'd like for us to include or any tweaks to what we've put together, I would welcome that, because we want to have something that would be comprehensive for new visitors to the site or people that are in town that say, you know, I'm not real sure about that, and so I want to know. And I think that would be a help for the public. With that, one of the things we did focus on was this paragraph G, which dealt with revoking permits, and that we had some of that language. We currently have that language. But I'll tell you, with legal short-term rentals, long before we had an ordinance that dealt with them, where they were permitted, we have not had any complaints. We've not had any issues with noise and trash and pets and parking. We just haven't. We've had those kind of issues with places where you can't do short-term rental. In neighborhoods, we've had multiple of those. And a lot of those are a trigger that lets us know something's not right at this location. They're not supposed to be renting short-term, and so that gives us reason to go investigate. Why are they having all these cars here and they're always different license plates? And that's one of the triggers for us to help us identify something may not be right at this location. But at the places where it's legal, we've not had any issues. And so the subcommittee agreed that that language maybe was a little bit strong, but we still had a fallback related to revoking permits if we needed to. The other point that I'll point out that I kind of briefly mentioned was when we established this ordinance originally in 2018, we began a registration process. All the short-term rentals in town, we need you to register, and we want you to renew that every year. And we started that. And we had I don't know how many, but we have a stack, and we have a list of all those. We can't do that. The Court of Appeals made it clear that that is not available. So the approach that the subcommittee agreed to was that if you're changing a use from a residence, a long-term residence or long-term rental situation, and you're going to do short-term rental, that triggers a use permit, a zoning permit for that initial change in use. And we will require a zoning permit, and we'll issue a permit, and then make sure that the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide and the 911 address and the applicable parking is available and meets the code. And that's how we're going to do it without doing a registration, but a permit process. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions and go from there. And then, there may be some that want to speak in the public.
Any questions, comments? Anyone in the audience want to comment? We'll be glad to hear it. Okay. So you need a motion to pass this back to council?
Yes, sir. And a recommendation on the ordinance, and if you have any other recommendations on the FAQs. We just kind of gathered some from other communities, and people would email, hey, maybe you need to include something on this topic, and we want to make it helpful and informative. So if there's anything there too.
And we can kind of leave that open if you have comments, if you think of something when you get
Yeah,
back
email
home.
me, please.
Shoot them an email. So we'll entertain a motion to adopt the draft ordinance that you have in front of you.
I make a motion that we adopt it.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous.
Okay.
Next item is downtown development standards.
Okay. So this is going back a few years, and I'll give you some background, but read the staff report to you and fill you in. We had a background and summary on the evaluation and proposed draft ordinance to address density, setback, building height, east versus west Main Street, landscaping, other topics as well in the downtown from 2018 and 19. At the 2022 winter retreat, council asked planning board to review and address these ideas and create a public involvement strategy to gain feedback from citizens. At this time, I encourage the planning board to review this information and be prepared to discuss tonight, and possibly establish a subcommittee to evaluate this in detail and prepare a public involvement strategy. I'll come back to that a little bit more about process. As we move forward, we want to involve council and have like a steering committee to help us create a public process so there's much more involvement on the front end and throughout until we establish some new rules that will help us with downtown. Original background. August 2018, Planning Board meeting, it was an ad hoc subcommittee formed to study the current development standards for central business and town center. Subcommittee was also asked to consider other development on 321 and standards that would govern that. Over the next several months, the subcommittee consisting of Pete Greeny, Mike Page, Wes Carter, and David Harwood met to discuss the development standards in downtown, and the group also invited Sue Glenn. She has compiled substantial research on building heights, floor area ratios, and all kinds of other facts about downtown. The group walked Main Street to visually comprehend the existing buildings of building heights, setbacks, sidewalk widths, mass, landscaping, design, and other factors. We even went into J.W. Tweed's to examine there's 3 levels in that building, and not many know that. There's a mezzanine that's a part of that. If you look from the outside, you don't notice all that, but the way that this building is constructed is interesting. And so as we walk through downtown, it helped us understand the relationships from buildings between each one, in behind buildings, and what's going on behind them, the limited space, not having any true alleys to access buildings in behind, just kind of a hit and miss on being have access in behind buildings. And then on the west side, and how each west and east differ in their setbacks and the types and styles of buildings. The next section we talk about, we addressed, and one of those was residential density. And then last October, council, with the planning board recommendation, removed residential density limits in central business and downtown. So that part has been addressed. But we want to go further. In 2018, some of the highlights from that is that first distinguished the different building heights and setbacks on the east versus west Main Street, and then the rest of central business. Does that need to have a different set of rules? There were some considerations of setbacks on the east side at 3 feet from the sidewalk and west at 15 feet. But the planning board and the subcommittee first developed a strategy to take the existing ordinance, do some simplification, and then try to address both of those in their different aspects. So included in your packet was a map of downtown showing the central business and the town center zoning, and then the draft ordinance. So we got to planning board in December of 2018 and approved, there was a recommendation to approve the draft ordinance. What we failed to do was involve the public adequately and fairly. So this go around, we want to have the public involved. And at this point, we want to establish a subcommittee that can work on this. This may be a 6-month process, but it is highlighted in our 2014 comprehensive plan, and it's something that we need to do. And the council's asked us to revisit this again, and I'll look for any other recommendations that you might have in addressing these issues.
If I'm remembering right, the Roger Brooks study had some recommendations in there about widening the sidewalks, and I guess with this additional setback, is that the intent to kind of push the buildings maybe a little bit further back and to be able to widen those sidewalks? Or were they going out
Certainly
in
on the
road?
east side, because right now it's, you can build back in the existing footprint. If you've got a building, you tear it down, you can build back in the existing footprint. What this draft was to, let's get 3 feet. Let's see if we can get, even if somebody can build back in the footprint, let's encourage to push back 3 feet, to gain a little bit, because we don't have, in some areas, we have a 3.5-foot sidewalk over here where the rug company, Carlos's old building. And then on the west side, maybe more than 15. I know Tim wants to share some things with you tonight that maybe we want to have more than that. And also some simplification of the standards that we have. We wrote them in 2005, adopted in 2006, and I wrote most of it, and I can tell you, it's confusing. Unless you know all the details on how to figure that out, it's hard to figure out how can I build this building? Well, if you do this, a lot of boxes to check, and so let's simplify some of that. And I think we can in revisiting this ordinance.
Question, if I may, in relation, just, I guess historically, even with the thinking in 2018, it wasn't adopted, I guess. The 3-foot setback or the setback on the west side being different. The frame of reference to the back of sidewalk and the 7 feet from back of curb, is there another way to do that? Because I think, again, going back to this exact same item, if the town, elects to remove parking on Main Street and expand the sidewalks into what's parking now, or reconfigure it somehow and expand the width of the public sidewalk, it's not that line shouldn't be moving forward for the building setback, right? The 7 foot from back of curb might become 12 feet, or it might become a larger number even, right? So is there, one, as a historical question, why was it referenced the way it was with the 7 feet from back of curb? And then 2, is there a different way to do that, whether it's a right-of-way line or some other more fixed metric?
To answer the question about why 7 feet, that would, where there was no sidewalk, that would provide an area to include a curb, 24-inch curb, and a sidewalk, a 5-foot sidewalk. So the 7 feet was, all right, if we don't have a sidewalk here, what establishment can we use? And so 7 feet from face of curb, I think was the term. I'll have to go back and look at it. But that was to understand, we want them to build a sidewalk if one is not there. And from there, we'll start measuring setback. But yes, we can do it a lot of different ways.
Yeah, just, however this goes forward, just that concept of 7 feet from the back of existing curb, I think it could create a problem into the future as that existing curb moves.
Yeah.
Where is the
This is
right of way
just
in most cases?
I'm sorry?
Where is the right of way in most cases?
Varies. We maintain sidewalks. On Main Street, I don't know there's an established right-of-way. DOT manages face of curb, and you get on down where there is no curb, it's back of ditch. So it's variable. And then the town maintains the sidewalk, which is don't know that it's in DOT right-of-way, some places it
It's an
is.
assumed right of way.
Yeah. But again, introductory, not going to, solve any of the issues tonight, but just get started and know that there are issues with it.
So you're looking for a subcommittee?
Looking for a subcommittee, and then would like to send that to council and ask for their involvement to put someone on, or maybe other members of the public to have a subcommittee.
Okay.
the initial part is to come up with a public process that gathers involvement. What do you like about downtown? What do you think, what do you wish we would change? What do you not want to change? That kind of stuff, so that we can hear the community. I mean, the 2014 comprehensive plan, community said, we need to establish rules that are different from the east and west. And it's time.
Well, I think just in walking Main Street and looking at east and west, you know, Roger Brooks mentioned authenticity. That was one of the words that he used. And I think part of this, the uniqueness of Blowing Rock is that space and that green space on the right, the west side of Main Street. And I think when we did 1150 Main, I think that was somewhat of a stunner, that all of a sudden we have this one building that was replaced a beautiful lawn with a building that's right on the sidewalk, and it's got a couple of planters and a couple of small trees, but it's probably the closest building to the sidewalk. And so I think part of the uniqueness of Blowing Rock is looking at the variances between east and west. And I think the public needs to be involved. We have a lot of people that have been involved in our history and a lot of people that have been in the community longer than some of us. And I think it's important that we hear from them. So I'm all for that. I think that's a great idea. And I don't think there's an easy answer or a short-term answer. I think it needs to be really studied and considered, and the uniqueness and the quaintness of Main Street has to be maintained. Because if we don't, we're going to totally change the personality of our town. And I think that's damaging to the town of Blowing Rock.
Sure. Tim he wants to share some slides, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Tim Gupton. I live at 235 Meadow Lane. And just for the record, I'll make sure you know that I'm speaking for myself personally. I'm on 5 boards based in Blowing Rock, and I'm not representing any organization. It turns out this topic is something I've been tracking since 2019 and have gotten very personally committed to seeing some change in this regard. And Kevin and I have worked together over the last few years with the planning board on some of this. So if you what I wanted to do is just sort of recap, and you've touched on a bunch of this in terms of what we've learned along the way, and make a few recommendations, and I'll take you through some slides very quickly. As Kevin said, the 2019 proposal wasn't approved by the town council essentially because there wasn't any public input and sort of was tabled. We learned from that, and the Valley Boulevard vision process was very successful, and there was a subcommittee that included community members, and there was a process with Benchmark, and there were a number of recommendations that were made that were adopted by the town council, and there are 2 pending recommendations from that study that are still on the table. So that's an example of a great process. Then came 1150 Main, and the community was looking at a relatively historical house on a big lawn with a lot of trees, and 1150 Main was approved based on the current code. I mean, the code allowed it to be built within 15 feet of the sidewalk, and even though there was a green space ordinance, and there was even a variance to reduce that from 75 to 40%, essentially it's concrete and planters. So this is a pivotal example of where we go from here. And if you'll go to the next slide. So I think I just mentioned some of these points. We lost major lawn, trees, and a historical house in the 1150 Main process. There are 5 properties that are at risk. We can click through them real quick. The first one, well, that's 1150 Main, it's gone. Rumpel is fortunately under restoration, and that lawn will be restored or kept. The Town Tavern is a huge piece of property, and if that were redeveloped, that would be a ginormous building. Then you have smaller, like the Martin House, which is partially historic. That's the annex, and then the next slide, I think, is next door, which is the Funky Tulip building, which is a house in the corner of Laurel and Main. And then on down the street further is the old Martin House, which is historic. And last, I think, is the Last Straw, which was a church. So all of those lawns and trees that make up West Main Street and the authenticity that we all enjoy, and you know, it's at risk. Go to the next slide. So when you go to the 2014 comprehensive plan, it's pretty obvious that the community has embraced our historical village, the authenticity that's shared, you know, by almost everyone in the community. In the 2014 comprehensive plan calls that out in this shared vision. And also on the next slide, it mentions historical and cultural resources and how preserving them is important to the future of our village. And then finally, the whole east-west question is addressed in the comprehensive plan where, I mean, I guess I understand there was a fire and the east side got built like a turn-of-the-century town, and the west side was saved, and therefore we have this historical mix of houses that become businesses, which happens in a lot of historical towns around the country. And typically those structures and areas of town are protected by a historical district. We don't have that here. But the main point I want to make is the last where the star is, it says on the west side, we would recommend respecting the unique qualities of each area that should be implemented primarily toward preserving the setbacks unique to each side. So you could take that to mean essentially change the ordinance to say you can use the footprint of the existing historical building, but not any closer to the sidewalk than that. Well, that may not be practical. I understand that. But 15 feet is just not what the community laid out in the 2014 comprehensive plan. So that's really what my challenge is, and hope that we can come to agreement where the setbacks on West Main Street and the green space ordinances are reflective of that intent of the historical, of the comprehensive plan. So a few recommendations you've already mentioned, including community members on the subcommittee, which I think is an important point. It would be good to have public notices of those meetings so people can know when they are and they can come and listen. I also, as Bill mentioned, because you've got the sustainable tourism plan, for example, that's out there with the recommendations. So what you're talking about tonight is sort of a subset of that bigger question. So I've encouraged the council and others to think of this like the Valley Boulevard process. Think of it as a downtown vision process that includes what you're talking about tonight, but also includes all those other pieces of the puzzle, like expanding the sidewalks and those kinds of recommendations that are on the table but not really addressed yet. All of this leads up to updating the comprehensive plan, which is due to be updated by 2024, 2 years. And my understanding is that the council and town manager and staff are all moving toward beginning that process next summer. So this all fits into that envelope of updating the comprehensive plan, addressing the downtown vision as well, but also specifically addressing what's the future of West Main Street. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Any other comments?
Bill, having served on the initial planning board subcommittee that did that study, and then also on the 321. I think it's important for you and your board members to understand the commitment that if you choose somebody or a number of people, that it's a lot of work. And, you know, if you're not committed to do the work, then don't do it. But it's important for continuity purposes to have somebody like Mike was there and a number of others at every meeting. And so as long as it took, it was still, you know, we got it done. I mean, we're happy with the result, and that would be my second point. You have to involve the community and let people know what you're doing. Thank you.
Good point.
Add to that, and people have heard me say this any number of times, be sure that the commissioners are on board with you and that they understand what they have charged you to do, so when you come back to them, they don't say, well, that's not what we were thinking about. And that happened to us in the 2018 work. It was a lot of work. It was in good faith on all sides, and the reason that it didn't work is understandable, but this is an opportunity in relationship to the new comprehensive plan to make this approach the things that Tim's talking about, approach the things that the planning board embraces, and then have that go to the commission. And of course, you gotta get Kevin involved, because Kevin's the one that understands what they said already.
I'll be there.
You got to write it up.
I'll be there.
All right. Do we have volunteers?
I'd like to volunteer.
I'd like to volunteer.
No problem.
Not fully understanding what I'm volunteering for,
We
but
just dove in head first.
Any others? How many you need?
No more than 4. Don't have to have 4,
Okay,
but no more than 4.
well, I'll go. That'll make it 4.
Okay. Okay.
Should we name a council person or request a council person?
Yeah.
They'll do that.
They'll do that, okay.
I'm just going to give them these names and kind of go back through what we've done.
Will they suggest a citizen representative or a business
Yeah,
owner or something? I think you need
we'll
some,
give them some time to,
somebody that represents the uptown businesses,
yep, be helpful.
or 2.
Somebody whose ox is about to be born.
Anything else on that topic?
I don't have anything. If anybody else in the community? Mike?
Yeah, you might speak to this, but one of the reasons to have a subcommittee is that it can meet and take action without having public notice and public attendance. To address other concerns about whether or not the public will be involved or be invited to the meetings or watch the process, those two things are not necessarily the same.
So my recommendation was to notice it. When you did the Valley Boulevard ad hoc committee, I just found out when they were meeting and just sat in the room. But it took, I had to ferret that out. I think the public ought to be able to listen to the discussion.
That's fine.
They're not speaking,
Mm.
just listen.
Oh, yeah. All right. Any other business?
I don't have anything. No, sir.
Any other comments from the board? All right. We'll adjourn.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.